Hello, welcome to our series of stories for Lent and for Easter, as written first by David Kossoff. The last story was about the trial of Jesus and the way in which Pilate responded. Today, this is Alexander's story as we go from the trial towards Golgotha and the events of Good Friday. So here is Alexander's story. When I look back, it seems to me that the whole thing had a sort of pattern, a shape. I'm not a superstitious man or particularly deep thinking, but I'm not young either, and age gives a sort of perspective. It was Paul of Tarsus who said that to me a year or two ago, and he is no fool. Indeed, Paul's own life had a pattern and a shape that no one could have foreseen. He and I had been talking of my father. He knows my father well and loves him. Most people do. Oh, he's old now, my father, but a bit special. And in his own way, rather famous, even now after nearly 20 years. Simon, the man who carried the cross for Jesus. My father, when he's sad or thinking back, tries to make a little joke. The heaviest work I ever did, he says, and I never got a penny for it. My brother Rufus and I were born in Cynetia, in the city Cyrene. My father's family had been here for generations. Fruit farmers, as we are, my father was. A perfect place to grow fruit, Cyrene. About 2,000 feet above sea level, with the sea, the great sea, only 5 miles away to the south. And a fine city. My father always said that of the 5 cities, the Pentapolis, Cyrene is the finest. Only one other place in the whole world was, as far as he's concerned, more beautiful than Cyrene, and that was Jerusalem, which is how we came to be there on that day. The big trip. I grew up hearing about this trip. Alexander, my father would say to me, when we make the trip, we will see wonderful things and places. We will see Alexandria, founded 300 years ago by your namesake. Now, these days, my father is rather frail. He has to be careful. His heart is not too good. But in those days, he was all muscle, big, powerful, a laughing, simple man, every inch of him a farmer. And when he spoke of the trip, he became that dreamer. The trip was to spend Passover just once in Jerusalem, to pray in the temple, to make offerings, to see the lovely buildings. Jerusalem was about 1,000 miles away. As far as we, a farmer's family, were concerned, it might have been 1,000,000. The trip was something we grew up with. We grew up hearing about. It was my father's big dream, a sort of family joke. But once, when Rufus and I were in our teens, and much given to scoffing, my mother said, no dream, no joke. Your father wants this. It will come to pass. And a year or two later it did. We were astonished. We made the trip. We went overland. We joined great trade camels. We saw Alexandria and Pelusium and Gaza. It took a long time, but my father had planned it very well. We found a little house to rent in the pretty country near Bethlehem, about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. Rufus and I spent the week before the Passover exploring and seeing everything that we could. There was so much to see. The golden city of Solomon and Herod, the gorgeous temple, the palaces, the changing of the procurator's Roman guard, the tower of Antonia, the hippodrome, and the theatres. And we listened as well as we looked. We understood everything. In Jerusalem, the Jews spoke both Aramaic and Greek, as here. And there seemed to be so much excitement in the city. A lot of talk about Jesus the carpenter, the miracle worker, the healer, the great preacher. We heard about him everywhere we went. Marvellous stories. People of all sorts. And we took it all home to Father. And he listened and he said, yes, I have also heard of him. Don't believe all you hear. And go to bed early. I want to be in the city at daybreak. There will be thousands. He was right. First day of Passover, the day before Sabbath, the big day. Mother stayed home, busy, but we were there, showing off our new knowledge to Dad. He was full of wonder. Everywhere, huge crowds, excitement. And then suddenly, there was a different sort of excitement. Absolutely unexpected, because round the corner came a screaming mob. A square of Roman soldiers, one of them carrying a roughly painted sign saying King of the Jews. We thought for the moment it must be a parade, a carnival, something for the festival. And then we saw inside the square a man bent under the weight of a huge wooden cross. He looked ghastly. He was deathly white and covered in blood. As we looked, he staggered and fell, and the cross banged down on him. The soldier in charge shouted back at him to get up, but he couldn't. The soldiers looked around into the crowd. One of them drew his short sword and came over to my father. You look strong, he said. Carry this cross. My father started to explain that we were tourists, pilgrims just there for the day. Doesn't matter, said the soldier. Roman law, you're pressed into service. Pick it up, you don't have a choice. And he whacked my father, not hard, as part of the law, with the flat of the sword. My father started to lose his temper, but the man on the ground was looking at him. It was a calm look, very tired. My father went across and bent down and shouldered the cross. It was obviously heavy. With his free hand, he helped the man to his feet and held him up. It was Jesus, although at that moment we didn't know it. The soldiers got into position again, and the procession moved off. It was a long way. We walked along by the soldiers. Once or twice I made a sign to my father that I would take my turn with the cross. I was as big and as strong as he was. But he shook his head and went on. I remember he looked rather proud. Jesus staggered along, almost without a word. Once he stopped and spoke to some women who were weeping as they walked with him. But the soldiers got rough with both him and the crowd. When we reached the place called Golgotha, the hill of the skull, the officer in charge talked to my father for a while, and then the soldiers took the cross away. Rufus and I wanted to stay, but my father said no. He said no in a way that we never argued with him. He's a very mild man, my father, but like steel about some things. We will not stay, he said. A man, that man, is to be stripped naked and nailed to that cross with iron spikes. The spikes go through his hands and his feet. The cross is then to be stood up and dropped into a hole so that it stands upright. The poor man's nearly dead with some of the worst floggings I've ever seen. His skin hangs like rags. He's neither criminal nor traitor. He's just a poor preacher. If this can happen in Jerusalem, said my father, on the Passover, this is no place for us. We go home tomorrow. Come on, boys. Our trip is over.